Hi, I'm Kylie Fowler, and my friend Rory Canavan has asked me to do a walkthrough of the process of the month. And this month we're going to talk about the software rationalisation process. So what we're going to cover is the primary and secondary objectives. We're going to walk through the process, talk about potential banana skins that make you fall flat on your face, say thank you very much to our sponsors, and then we'll talk about what's coming up next month. So the software rationalisation process, the primary objective of it is to compare the software titles by classification. And what we mean by classification is actually the function that that software does to provide value to the business. We can find out a very high level understanding of what the software does, often through our discovery tools, which will enable you to run a report, which will give you the high level indication that this is a game or a finance piece of software or a PDF writer. But actually, although that's helpful, we do need to make sure that we understand how that piece of software brings value to our business. So understanding how it's actually used within our business. To have a general picture of what that piece of software is not good enough. So that's something that we'll talk about more later on. How do we get that understanding of what's important in our business? So we need to make sure that this process runs probably annually, but I would suggest you don't need to sit down once a year and go through your entire software catalogue. Probably what you would do is you would take a function and every month just work through all the software in that particular function. So divide your catalogue into 11 or 12 and do a little bit of it each month. Secondly, and this is the absolute crux of this process and why it's worthwhile running, is that we are going to try and make recommendations for the removal of certain software titles. Now the reason we're doing that is because what we want to try and achieve economies of scale and economies of scope. Now economies of scale are well recognised and most people understand that if you are buying more of the same item, then the individual unit cost will be cheaper, and so you can achieve economies of scale. However, economies of scope are less known, but actually are still extremely powerful. Economies of scope are the efficiencies and the cost reductions to be gained when you have streamlined processes and reduced number of processes and software titles within your organisation. So a key output, a key benefit of running this process is that we will be trying to achieve economies of scale and economies of scope. Now finally, this process interacts with the supported software catalogue status setting function. So as we run through this process, the output will be a change or an update or a review of the current status of that software within our software catalogue. So let's walk through the process. So the first thing we need to do is we need to generate the inventory report. But that inventory report needs to have the titles filtered by classification, filtered by their function. And as I said, many discovery tools will have a high-level function included in their inventory. So you'll be able to see a list of all of the products plus that high level. Are they finance? Are they games? Are they PDF writers? However, we do need to ideally have a deeper and more granular understanding of what that piece of software does within our business. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So when we get our inventory title, we're actually then comparing the titles by that software classification, by their functionality, and we're reviewing them. Now when we review them, we need to make sure that we bring together all of our stakeholders and we consider some really important factors to help us decide which pieces of software we'd like to remove from our business. So we need to bring in stakeholders from the business who actually use the software to explain to us what value they receive from which bits of functionality. We should bring in the product champion, which is the person who best understands overall how the product is used within the organisation. We need to discuss with our software asset manager. We need to potentially bring in the service desk team leader who can tell us how expensive or problematic that piece of software is to support, we might want to talk to our technical architects because they'll have a deeper understanding of how that software fits within the broader technology stack of the business. So as we go through and review our titles, we need to think about what status should they have within our supported software catalogue. So the first status is a green status. Now this is what I would call our general standards. And these are the pieces of software that we're very comfortable with supporting, we understand the value, and we are achieving economies in scale and scope by having them deployed as much as possible within our environment. The next status is our amber status, and this is what I would call our exception standards. Now these are pieces of software which ideally we would try and avoid deploying in our estate, but actually there may be exceptional reasons as to why they are required. And an example of this is PDF writers. I've worked in construction companies that use building information modelling software. Now that BIM software frequently doesn't work with the cheap or free PDF writers, and so actually for a small subset of our engineers we had to purchase Adobe Acrobat. So although we had a very cheap PDF writer as our general standard that had a status of green within our supported catalogue, we also had Adobe Acrobat with a status of amber, and it was an exception status. An exception standard. Other exception standards occur when, for instance, we have a piece of software which has been upgraded. So the older version of that piece of software may still be required for exceptional reasons or for particular reasons, perhaps because there's other pieces of software compatible with it, but not with the upgraded piece of software. But the upgraded piece of software would have the green status, and the legacy version of the software would have an amber status, and it would be considered an exception standard. Now, the final status is our red status, and these are software titles that we want to remove from the organisation. So these are the software titles where we've decided there is no benefit in retaining them, and so in fact we want to undeploy them, and we then would like to redeploy with our general standard or one of the exception standards if appropriate. So we need to update all of our software with the appropriate status. Now sometimes the status may remain unchanged, in which case we would just amend the date of review. Otherwise we would change the status using the maintainer supported software catalogue process, which is number 18, and which is what we discussed last month. Or we would remove the piece of software using the software removal process, which is process number 20, and which, by coincidence, is next week's process of the month. So, what are our banana skins? Well, the first and foremost, this is a process which is frequently just never run. And the reason is because it doesn't feel like a priority. The benefits aren't obvious to this process, and particularly in organisations where they're a low margin business, they don't have a big IT budget, they don't have a lot of people to support complex processes, it's frequently just put on the back burner constantly. The second issue is that software classification, the functionality of that software, is not something that you have recorded for the titles on your estate. And again, this is likely to be the case in low margin businesses that are quite resource constrained, because it's actually really difficult. You have to go out and talk to the business and get under the bonnet of how they're using the functionality of their software. However, I would suggest that the potential savings in terms of economies of scale and economies of scope are really quite significant. So it's worth identifying some low-hanging fruit within your estate that you can run through this process in order to try and receive some benefit. And I'd suggest that PDF writers are a classic case, and potentially also things like project viewers and other straightforward pieces of software that have a very well understood functionality. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much to our sponsors. And at the bottom of this page, you will also see the URL for the SAM Charter Process Kit version 2. So if you're interested in purchasing and downloading the rest of this kit, then please feel free to go to that URL and take a look. Now next month, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the software removal process. And then finally, if you're interested in getting in touch with Rory, here are his contact details, and I know he would love to hear from you. So thank you very much, and I'll speak to you next month.